Celestial greetings. I'm Janet Booth, a professional astrologer from West Hartford, Connecticut, and welcome to my program on astrology called Looking Up. The topic for today's show is wild summer tides, and obviously this is 2018 we're speaking of, and I happen to be actually taping this on June 14th, right after a new moon, and it's Flag Day, and it's also the birthday of President Trump. And I'm not going to talk about his birthday chart. I'm going to talk about first the summer solstice chart. And let me just say first that one reason why I entitled this Tides rather than just waves, if you go to the beach, and you hopefully will this summer, the waves come in, and sometimes when they're big and you're, playing in them and you get knocked down by one, and as soon as you get up and get your bearings, boom, another one comes and another one comes. Well, those waves are maybe kind of like the daily movements of the planets. But tides are something over the course of hours, and the tides here that I'm speaking about in astrology are going to be talking about longer periods of time than just the sort of day-to-day that's rocking us with the waves. It's sort of like the gradual increases, or sometimes maybe they come to a very high point because, when you have like a full moon, your high tides are higher and all that kind of thing. So first I will mention that at the start of any season, we can look at when the moment the sun enters the new sign, so in summer that's Cancer, and we stop the clock and we say, well, what's going on with the planets at this time? And one of the biggest things that's happening for a lot of the time in this summer is a third of the sky, a trine, very harmonious degrees, between Jupiter and Neptune. So we have a lot of, I want to say empathy, at least in certain circles, for what's going on with the immigrants. Right now, the United States is embroiled with separating children from their parents, holding everybody in detention. These are people who want to be refugees at our border. And Jupiter has a lot to do with the international relations, and Neptune can almost be like a flood of immigrants, but it's also the planet that's most about our sympathy and charitable concerns. So I'm hoping that by the time you see this in July or August, we've addressed a lot of that. But, at this solstice, it'll be a triangle called the Grand Trine, and the other piece of it is Mercury, and Mercury is the mouthpiece, the messenger. So it's the news. So I expect we're going to see a lot in the news about foreign relations and about our charitable treatment of foreigners. The other thing that's indicated in the solstice chart, and then we're going to see it in all of the eclipse charts, and we've talked before about what's called the nodes of the moon. And this is an axis that cuts through the chart. There's a north node exactly opposite a south node, same degree in minutes of the two opposite signs. And it works backwards across the zodiac, I think that way, across time. And it's the intersection of the moon going around the earth as the earth's going around the sun. So when these nodes are aligned with a new or full moon, we get eclipses, and we're going to talk about that very shortly. But on an interpretational level, we say that the south node shows what do we need to release, been there, done that. North node is what do we need to embrace, but it's harder because we haven't been there and done that yet. So currently, the nodes are moving through the signs of Aquarius for the south node, Leo for the north node. So we have this energy about collective masses, common issues. That's the sort of release point. And what we grow toward is Leo, more of our own creative, personal expression. Thing is, when the masses need a lot of help, you can't just only focus on yourself. If you're too, self-centered, you're not doing what needs to be done for the whole populace. So that's a bit of a dilemma during these times of Aquarius South Node. But what's interesting, if a planet lines up on a south node, it says, oh, here's the energy of this planet, and that's what we need to release. and that's Mars. For the whole summer, Mars is hanging out with the south node. And Mars is going to go into that condition called retrograde, where it appears to back up in the zodiac and then come forward again. So its whole backup period is about 2 months, from 6/26 to 8/27. And that means it hangs out in the same part of the zodiac for probably close to 4 months. And always that's near this south node. At the summer solstice, what's near the north node that says we need to orient toward is Venus, the love planet. And actually Leo is the sign about the heart and generosity. So if we say we need to be loving and generous to everybody, the masses, the populace, and release our anger. And there's a lot of divisiveness right now in the United States, and we happen to have in our birth chart, the moon is in Aquarius, and the moon rules the populace. So it's going to be a big issue, that kind of divisiveness for the summer. And we are going to have eclipses in the sign of the nodes, Aquarius and Leo. So we'll be looking at those charts in a moment. What I want to also mention is, as Mars is hanging out with the south node, both nodes and the Mars are lining up and making, whichever direction you want to look at it in, they're making a T, which stands for tension that leads to turning point. And they're making the T with the planet Uranus. Uranus is the ruling planet of Aquarius. Also has to do with the masses, the populace. Also has to do with rebellion, revolt. I don't think we're going to see any big revolt, but we might see a lot of demonstrations and resistance and things like that, kind of like when we had the march right after the inauguration. And because Uranus is also very slow, and the nodes are not that quick, this pattern hangs out for the whole summer. So at certain points, different planets enter into and join in the pattern. So for instance, at the summer solstice, Venus joins in that pattern, and it's saying, let's bring a loving heart into the process of making a revolutionary change in how we treat people, and how we also find our own unique North Star and march to the beat of our own drummer, which is a very Uranus kind of thing. Now, Uranus has just entered into Taurus, and we did a whole show on that a couple of months ago. I want to say maybe April, probably. And Taurus rules Earth and all things on it, and the plates of the Earth itself, and even guess what, volcanic eruptions. The day that Uranus went into the sign of Taurus, the Earth, volcanoes and earthquake, but the volcanoes started erupting in Hawaii. And since then we have another one erupting in Guatemala. And we may see some more earthquakes before long. And over the course of the next 7 years, as Uranus moves through Taurus, more of the same. Okay, so other things that are important at the summer solstice, and this gives us the sort of vibration for the whole 3 months of the summer season. We've got the moon in Libra at that time, and that's also a peace-loving sign, harmonious, cooperative. Hopefully that's what we're going to see a lot going on with it. But we have a lot of work to do on our Mars energy. There's a condition called out of bounds. I've probably spoken about this before, but we always think about, the 360 degrees of the zodiac that a planet orbits. But it's more like a carousel, and as it goes around, it goes up and down and up and down. And so the path of the sun defines what's inbounds, or what's the normal playing ground for the planets. And when a planet goes further above or further below that swath that the sun goes up and down, it's said to be out of bounds. And that's what Mars is doing also for most of the summer. Let's see, it was out of bounds briefly from March 17th to the April 7th. July 7th, it comes back to the out of bounds again and stays there till the 24th of September. So that's most of the summer. And when Mars is out of bounds, especially if you're in a Mars-ruled sign, if you're an Aries sun sign or rising sign, or even moon sign, you may find that your assertiveness is over the top, or your energy is off the charts, or your aggressiveness is also too much. And it could say, that anger maybe gets to the boiling point. Fortunately, when it's going through Aquarius, which is a sort of cool air sign, logical, you try to stay more level-headed. It's not as explosive as if, say, it was in a fire sign. So we've got the first of 3 eclipses. Now here's what happens. When a new moon and a full moon are near the nodes, they are eclipses. And sometimes, you have usually a pair, and then about 6 months later, a pair at the opposite node axis. Sometimes you can have 2 new moons with a full moon in between, and they're all eclipses. And that's what we have this summer. Once in a while, you might get 2 full moons with a new moon in between, all eclipses. So when there's 2 new moon eclipses a month apart, neither one of them is really close to the nodes. So neither one of them is a total eclipse like we had last summer in the United States when we all went out with our special glasses and looked. And therefore, they may seem like they're a little bit weaker of an eclipse. However, that said, if it's hitting your chart, it's not weak. Now, I was just at a big astrologers convention in Chicago at the end of May. Hundreds of lectures to pick from. It was really tough. But I went to an excellent one on eclipses by a young fellow named Wade Caves, like you're going to go exploring in the caves, or maybe you wade into the water in the caves. He's got a cool name. But anyway, he was talking about, the ancient astrologers looked at the eclipses and they said things like, if you can't see it, if you're not in the path of visibility, it's not going to affect you much. In my modern interpretations working with clients, I find it affects you. Okay, so we'll cast that one aside. The other one they said that was interesting, or he said, well, going to the ancients, the duration of a total eclipse is going to indicate the period, how long it has to manifest. So that eclipse was 2 hours and I think 44 minutes, if I can find my notes on that, yes. And so he says that means it would take about 2 years, 8 months, and 24 days until that eclipse totally expresses itself. And he says just kind of now, starting around April or May, it's first starting to show its main effects. And I thought that's interesting because that was at the exact degree of President Trump's rising sign. And I said, something should be in effect for him very personally, even physically possibly. And nothing seemed to happen. So, well, even though he has such a lucky chart. But now we can keep our eyes on it because we're not out of that eclipse yet. But here comes a new eclipse. So the eclipse is on July the 12th, 10:48 p.m. here. But it's a solar eclipse, so that's after sunset. We are not going to see it. That one is going to be visible in southern Australia. It's taking place down near the South Pole. But what's important for everybody is that the degree is 20 degrees of Cancer, and it lines up exactly across from Pluto. And Pluto, of course, has an explosive side to it, or a sort of major change, transformation, evolution, hidden things. Now, an eclipse means that the moon gets between the Earth and the sun, and it blocks out some of the sun's light. So when we think in terms of our kind of power or ego is being somewhat blocked or thwarted, and across from the sun is really where the Earth would show up in a chart. So Pluto is with the Earth at this eclipse, and I am concerned still about earthquake types of things, but it's probably more likely that it causes kind of an eruption or an earthquake in your life if it's hitting your chart strongly. And something that's interesting is people who were born around 1930 were born with Pluto around 20 degrees of Cancer, where this eclipse is going to take place. And so they are having Pluto opposite Pluto in their charts now. And that sounds impossible because Pluto has an orbit of 249 years. But guess what? It's got a really egg-shaped orbit. So when it goes through the skinny end of the egg, it goes through the signs faster. So the slowest part is Taurus, and the quickest part was Scorpio, and now it's still going more quickly than, sometimes through signs. So these people are having a Pluto opposite Pluto. They're already about 89, 88. They're also getting their third Saturn returns, some of them. And Saturn has to do with aging and maturity and almost like time or time's up. And Pluto is the planet of death. Before we discovered Pluto, they used to put the kind of Grim Reaper robe and Sith onto Saturn, old man Saturn. But in Chicago, I saw a depiction of Saturn with his hourglass, his Sith, and angel wings. I thought, wow, to think of Saturn as an angel was a little outside of my usual scope. But Saturn is fair. You should be carrying the scales. You know, you get back what you put out. It's about karma. Anyway, if you know somebody who's born around 1930, this may be the summer that they have a real health crisis or possibly even pass. And if not, if they're in good condition at that age, then maybe they're going to, do something significant to celebrate their achievements. So we also see a very nice, what we call Earth Grand Trine with Venus, Ceres, good for gathering up things about money, Saturn, getting your payback for your hard work, and Uranus, maybe an unusual level of recognition, reward, or reaping at that solar eclipse. So it's not all bad. Kind of like that. One thing I don't like, Mars halfway between Jupiter and Uranus. So if people have a temper, that could be pretty volatile around that new moon eclipse. Then we have the full moon eclipse that's sandwiched in between two new moon eclipses. Now this is interesting because we oftentimes talk about the period between eclipses as being the most intense energy, or a lot of big news is happening or big things are going on. And usually it's just 2 weeks between a new and a full, or a full and a new moon. But when we've got the two new moon eclipses, you've got 4 weeks between the eclipses instead of just 2. So it's kind of like doubled when we got twice the number of eclipses and twice the number of the intense in-between time frame. So this full moon eclipse is on July 27th at 4:20 p.m. in Washington, and that means we don't see it because it's not night. Got to be nighttime to see a lunar eclipse. That one is going to be visible and is a total lunar eclipse, which means the Earth's shadow totally covers the moon. It looks very red. It is in the eastern half of Africa, all of the Middle East, India, Turkey, and all of the, I call them stands, Uzbekistan and the other stands, Pakistan. So that's kind of a volatile area of the world, and important things are happening with the U.S. trying to is moving its embassy to Jerusalem. We've got the Syria problem still going on. We still have some ISIS. We still have some Iraq. So that area I expect is going to be very intense, especially in those 2 weeks between July 27th and the next new moon eclipse on August 11th. I did look at things like, Bibi Netanyahu's chart. I wanted to see if he had something that was hitting him on the eclipses, and I didn't see that exactly. A little bit close, but not right on, from the Leo solar eclipse on the 11th of August. But anyway, this lunar eclipse is pretty big, and what's most interesting about it, when we talk about that T-square that has Mars with the south node and Uranus with the nodes, the moon comes in and joins the south node and Mars, and the sun is across from that. So this takes place at 4 degrees 45 minutes approximately of Aquarius, and Uranus is at 2.5 of Taurus, so that's 2 degrees on that leeway, the orb, and Mars is at almost 4, it's at 358 and going backwards. So it really is pushing us to have kind of a breakthrough in your own life, how you can work very nicely with this. As we say, a full moon is a peak, a culmination. Something might come to an end. You've had enough of it. You've had your fill. And with Mars things, it might be something like, I've pushed really hard on this new venture, and now I see I've reached that first goalpost measuring milestone, and now I can go on to the next step. Or back to the idea of releasing anger about something, or maybe finding what's your most natural and easy exercise, because the natural and easy comes along with that south node, almost with the been there, done that. But even if you haven't done that, it's like maybe we'll try it if you've never tried it before. Or meditation, that's a great thing to try with Aquarius and even with a Uranus presence. And maybe that helps you have a better control, and logic will supersede emotions. So that's a strong factor. We also have Venus kind of playing in a little bit. It's in the square and a half, which is still the same kind of tension and pressure and abrasion with the Mars-Uranus. So be careful about impulsive spending, and don't be surprised if something comes up unexpected that is a need for further expense. Now here's something that's happening that's very interesting, that when Mars is in its backwards mode, it comes between the Earth and the Sun, and it makes its closest approach to Earth on the 27th, 26th, the 31st of July. It makes its closest approach. And it hasn't been this close since 2003, when it's made its greatest approach in 60,000 years. And it generally does this about every 15 to 17 years. It'll have one of these very close approaches. So when we think in terms of Mars is out of bounds, it's off the scales, it's coming closer than it's been in a long time, it's amplified by this big full moon eclipse, it is the planet of war. The eclipse is in the Middle East, but it's a full moon. If we're lucky, maybe it's going to mean we've had the fill, we've done enough, something will come to a close with one of those conflicts in the Middle East. We pray for that. Okay, now there's going to be an opposition between the Sun and Mars. That's what happens when we've got that Mars passing retrograde between the Earth and the Sun. And I thought I brought a chart for that, but yes, here it is. Okay, it happens, the opposition happens the same day as the eclipse, just hours before the eclipse. So, and the Mars-Uranus square is exact on the 1st of August. Something's going to give right in that time frame, around the end of July, beginning of August, pop. We'll see what it is. Pop goes the weasel. All right. Then our second solar eclipse, which is probably the more powerful of the two because it's in Leo, and Leo is the sign that the sun rules. And it happens closer to the north node, and it's trying to give us that direction to go in and to follow the path with the heart. That is at 18 degrees and 41 minutes of Leo. And if you happen to have been born in the final few couple or 3 months of 1949 or 1950, you had your natal Pluto at about that 18, 19 degrees of Leo, and this eclipse is going to highlight your Pluto a lot. Now, if I didn't mention it, Pluto is a planet that likes us to get rid of stuff, move on, let go, get, well, it's in Capricorn, so it wants us to get organized, like my papers should have been better organized. And it's very good for shedding and, take the stuff out of the basement, get it out of the garage, recycle, all that kind of stuff. So see if you can't do some of that this August after the 11th on that eclipse. And let's see what's important with this one. Okay, we still continue to have this all summer long, like I said, Jupiter, Neptune. And if you're in a creative field, entertainment field, trying to get more of a media presence, this is a great summer for you for doing that. And the month after the eclipse may not be all the best because Mercury, one of the communication planets, is in 90 degrees with Jupiter. So it just takes an extra uphill push to be in contact with the people you want to be in contact with for what you want to do in a bigger media way. In fact, you might want to wait. If you look at, say, the bar chart of all the summer or all the year's retrogrades, and this is a free PDF download from the study booth in my astrologybooth.com website, and you look for On a Page. And it's going to show you that Here's the Mars retrograde for 2 months, like I said, end of June to end of August. And during that period, we have the Mercury retrograde. It takes place entirely during the Mars retrograde. That is a very difficult time, and also during that period, let's see, the Mercury retrograde is something like the 26th of July, so it's motionless at that eclipse, till the 19th, I think, of August. 8 planets are retrograde at the same time, 7 to 8 for the July-August time frame. You kind of want to wait till the early-ish part of September, where there's a little breathing room before we get into a Venus retrograde, that when it ends, the Mercury starts. We've talked about that before. This is a tough year. Okay, so at this eclipse, we have Venus still the evening star. It's in better condition with Mars, I can say that. So a little bit better for the relationships between men and women. You know, the genders aren't fighting. And we may have something like even a little magic in the air for romance. We can only hope. Okay. There was something else I wanted to mention about that double retrograde. Oh, yes. So it's entirely in the sign of Leo for Mercury, but we have Mars across, going back and forth between the latter degrees of Capricorn, the early degrees of Aquarius. They don't actually make an opposition while both are retrograde, but right before it goes into the retrograde range, Mars does oppose with Mercury on the 5th of July, which is just about the USA birthday. So we're going to have still probably some fighting words that we're dealing with internally and externally during our next, I guess, birthday year. So for the US, if you count 3 months before the birthday, that's around April 4th to the next April 4th. Oh, goody. Okay, so another chart I wanted to just look at. Well, I said I wasn't going to talk about the president's birthday today, but I think I just will for a moment. So in the place opposite the rising is the self. Opposite that is across from us, like on guard and fencing, our adversaries. And at his birthday, it was just after a new moon, so the sun and moon are very close together, and they're right at that setting point in the birthday chart calculated for Washington, and that is where he was for his birthday. So I think that means there's going to be a strong kind of push against him. But at any new moon, that luck spot is by the rising point all the time. So, and he has such a lucky chart. He seems to like get away with things. I don't know why all the time, but he does. Okay, I looked at 4 different USA birthday charts. Well, 4 charts for the USA and what's going on at their birthdays. You know, we can't agree on what our birth time is, but in all of them, we have Mars and Venus. Oh no, not all of them. One of them does not. Oh, goody. Okay. Well, we always have this Mars-Uranus thing going on. Can't help that. Uranus is on an angle, meaning it has extra strength in the chart that I usually use. The chart that I'm being convinced is even a better chart. That's got Mars right at the top. Yippee-doo. That was reminding me of, if you look at where the planets were rising and setting at any given moment. In a president's chart, where Mars rises or sets or hits the overhead or bottom part of the chart, those are places where conflicts break out during that president's administration. And in Donald Trump's chart, one of those lines goes through North Korea, and he's trying to make peace. Thank you very much. One of the lines goes very close to Washington, D.C. and up to Ottawa. And now we're having problems with Canada, and I kind of say he's at war with our own country. So we'll see what all of this sort of turning point with Mars brings about with that. But when you talk about freedom of the press, and the press is your enemy, no, it's our First Amendment freedom of speech. And I'm happy to be able to give my freedom of speech right now. And speaking of speech, I guess I'm about done, because the time is just about up. So we'll see what kind of high tides and waves wash through your life this summer, and through our country's life and our world's life. And try to be optimistic and look for your best path with the heart. And I'll see you soon again on